at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. I've recently moved to the UK, and I'm now the Associate Professor for Digital Innovation at the University of Lincoln. Um, Over the last 5 years or so, I've been increasingly interested in the use of AI, mainly in clinical practice and health professions education context. And over the last 3 years, have been focusing most of my time on the use of generative AI in a range of different contexts. Tim and Pam reached out to invite me to share some ideas on what we might think of as the use of AI in the business of practice. So rather than looking at AI in clinical practice and looking at AI in education, how might we think about the use of AI to manage business practices? So I'm going to be stepping a little bit outside of my comfort zone because that's not really something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. But I hope that the presentation today will kind of give us all some food for thought. Before I start, can I just get a sense with a show of hands, how many people are users of generative AI? So those would be models like ChatGPT from OpenAI, and Claude from Anthropic, Gemini from Google. Seeing a couple of hands go up. Would you say that you use it daily, weekly, monthly? I suppose I've given you too many options there. Daily.
Yeah, pretty much daily.
Okay, so some reasonably heavy users. Okay, cool. So maybe some of what I'm going to be talking about is not going to be all that new for you. So if, I've tried to pitch it at a certain level, making assumptions about what people are using it for. So I'm going to share my screen now. We'll be pausing the presentation every now and again to have some discussion. Can you
Michael,
see?
can I just very briefly interrupt you? No, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to make it clear to everybody that this meeting is recorded, and this will be available for IPPTA members later on. So if you're happy with that, leave your camera on. If you don't want to be on screen, remember that this will be recorded. Hoping that that's okay for everybody. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, not a problem. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, cool. All right. All right. So I'm just going to start off with a very, very simple introduction to generative AI. So generative AI is a next word predictor. That's all it's ever doing. It's taking the prompt that you give it, and it's saying, based on this prompt, I think that the first word in the sentence should be this. And then based on that, I think that the next word in the sentence should be this. And all it's ever doing is looking one word ahead and making predictions about what the probability of the next word in the sentence should be. So it doesn't really have any context that it can refer to, although this is increasingly changing, and I'll talk about some of that detail a little bit later. But generative AI is also increasingly multimodal, so that means it can transform information between text, audio, image, and video. At the moment, video is still prohibitively expensive, but it's relatively trivial to convert from text to audio and image at this point. Generative AI is increasing in competence. So 6 months ago, you would see that generative AI can't do X, and then today X is trivial. I still see people talking about the fact that AI hallucinates and makes up citations, and this is a big concern in the higher education space. These are from relatively unsophisticated users of AI. I haven't had a hallucinated citation in more than 18 months, and I use this technology all the time. Generative AI is everywhere. We see it in the new operating systems that are coming out of Apple, Linux, and Microsoft. So Windows 11 has got Copilot integrated deeply into the operating system. We're seeing it in software, cars, phones. And I think of this as intelligence on demand that's free for everyone. Now, I know it's not really free, and I know it's not really for everyone. But for the large majority of users around the world, they have access to a frontier language model that would be Claude 3.7. At the moment, it's Gemini 2.0 or GPT-4 or 4.5. These are very intelligent models that everyone has access to, even on the free tiers. And every day we see that the amount of tokens, the number of tokens, so the number of conversations and back and forth interactions you can have with models is just increasing all the time. The bigger context windows mean that we can upload documentation to language models that will then form the basis for the conversations that we have with it. And increasingly, we're just seeing that we can upload more and more context, again, even on the free models. And this is what allows the frontier language models to do a technique called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. So when you upload a document to the model, what it's doing is it's reading through all the content in that document, and then it's basing its response on the content that you've uploaded. So it means that it increases the accuracy and the competence of the model to engage around certain topics that you define in advance. And then the newer models are using something called a mixture of experts. So these are not monolithic models that are kind of good at most things. It's a conversational model that sits on the top and delegates responsibility and tasks to smaller experts that are able to achieve quite high levels of performance across a very wide range of domains. So I thought just for the use case today, it might be interesting to just walk through a use case of business development for a private practice owner. So like I said at the very beginning, this isn't really my area. So forgive me if I'm making some assumptions about what this really looks like. But I hope that you'll get the drift. So imagine we've got a new practice owner who doesn't really have much experience on the business side of practice. So they lack strategic business experience and they want to expand and grow their business, but they don't have the skills and the expertise to do that. So they would struggle with market analysis, client acquisition, and business model transformation if that's an area that they're interested in. This is what I'm going to be focusing the presentation on today, but I guess you can imagine that there'd be a wide range of other aspects of private practice that you might want to consider if you were going to be expanding your business. And so I want to suggest that AI can serve as a virtual business consultant, which can give you tailored insights and roadmaps for how you might want to implement changes over time. So this kind of technology would democratize the way that you think about business development, which would enable business owners to make strategic decisions, even though their focus is on clinical practice. So I'm going to kind of go through a progression of what this might look like. And I'm going to start with developing an online presence. You can imagine that there would be other areas of practice that you might want to consider if this were your business. So I'm not suggesting that this is the order in which you should do things, but this is just the order that I chose and that made sense to me. So you might decide that you might want to use AI to create a compelling online presence. You want to communicate your values, the services you offer, and your unique approach. So what is your USP, your unique selling point to physiotherapy practice in your area? You'd want to optimize website content because you'd want to improve your SEO rankings and your search visibility because you want to increase client acquisition. You might want to use it to develop professional branding materials. So I still see people building websites where they use what looks like clip art from Microsoft Word. This doesn't really inspire the kind of confidence in your clients that you might want to aspire to. And so how do you craft clear service descriptions and value propositions using AI? So these are just some examples. Again, if you want to think about developing online presence, you would also include maybe a social media strategy and what that would look like. So there are other areas that you would consider in this. Yeah, again, this is just a very, very high level overview. So just if I were to pick one example of from that list, I'm just going to do a website analysis. So what I've done is I've just gone to a local physiotherapy practice. It's actually a colleague of mine. I've taken a PDF of his website and I've uploaded that website to Claude. Claude is a frontier language model from Anthropic. So I've uploaded the content and I've said I want Claude to do an analysis of the ability of this website to help me with client acquisition, to do an analysis of its usability and accessibility. I wanted it to examine the website's strengths and weaknesses, give me feedback on the service descriptions, and the effectiveness of any calls to action that are on the website. I also asked it to generate a set of recommendations to improve client acquisition and how I could enhance the user experience of the website, and then explore how the process might increase new client inquiries. So this is the prompt that I gave to Claude. This is what I would consider to be a relatively simple prompt. The prompt heuristic that I usually advise people to use is role, goal, instruct, discuss. So you describe your role, you give the AI a role, you give it a goal of the interaction. So at the end of this, I want us to achieve this. And then you give it a set of instructions. I want you to do this, then I want you to do this. So you can see after the highlight, I say, we're going to begin with an analysis. I want you to give me feedback. So I'm giving it instructions. I'm telling it what I want from it. And then discuss. So I'll give you an example of what that discussion looks like. I've also highlighted that I think I want to change the business model of this practice. We want to move from a pay-as-you-go business model to something that's more like a subscription-based service. And I thought that that might be interesting just because it would kind of allow us to explore a few different options. So, that may not be possible in your context. I don't know what the regulations are around subscription-based physiotherapy practices, but I just thought it might be interesting to explore. So you can see that at the end there, I usually finish prompts like this with ask clarifying questions because I recognize that I probably haven't given the model enough context that it needs in order to address my prompt sufficiently. So I always ask it to ask clarifying questions. So these are the clarifying questions that Claude came back to me with. Who's my primary target? What services generate the most revenue? Do you currently track website analytics? I won't go through all of these, but you can see that Claude is trying to get a sense of what my current practices are around how I build websites and how I aim for new client acquisition. So the more context you can give it, the better advice it's going to give you around website design. Now, I asked Claude to build a wireframe design for this website. And so you can see on the right, that's what it suggested. And that already is a big step up from the existing website. You can see that on the left, it talks about the key design elements in the wireframe. So it's explaining exactly what it's done and why it's done that. Now, obviously, this isn't a real website, but it's giving me some sense of what a website might look like that was better designed, better optimized for the goals that I have in my practice. But now I know that this isn't good enough, and I know that Claude can do a lot better than this. So this is the discuss part of the interaction, where I go back to Claude and I say, that's a really good start, but I want you to do more. I want you to dig deeper. I want you to give me more. And so we had a little bit more of a back and forth. And now you can see that Claude has generated another website that looks substantially better. You can see on the left-hand side, it's split it up into value proposition and messaging. So it's describing why it thinks I need to lay things out in the way that it has suggested. It suggested subscription tiers for a subscription model that you might want to consider. And it's designed all of this without me doing any code. You don't need to know any kind of HTML. And you can imagine taking this and giving it to a web developer or whoever's busy with your website, or maybe you could use it on your own. But you could use this as a kind of a starting point for you to start thinking about website design. Now, obviously, I've only taken one example of developing an online presence. You could do this for your social media strategy. So you could go back to Claude and you could say, this is my social media username. These are the kinds of people that I want to target. What kind of messages should I use? What kind of hashtags should I use? How should I write this call to action in a way that I might get people to come to my website? So I'm going to pause there and then just see if anybody has any questions or if any of this resonates with you. Is this new, or is this kind of thing old hat? You already knew that generative AI can build websites. Maybe we can just open it up for some questions and discussion for a couple of minutes. Or if I should just continue, that's also fine. I don't know. I can't see any of the
Michael, just a very, very basic question. Is this service, is Claude then free, or have you paid for this?
Well, I pay for Claude, but this is available in the free version of Claude as well. So the only difference between the free version and the paid version with Claude is the number of tokens that you can send back and forth to the model. So that means that if you're on the free version, you are going to reach your daily limit soon if you are doing things like building websites. If you pay for Claude, then you can have a lot more interaction and discussion over the course of a day. Whereas if you are paying for ChatGPT or OpenAI gives you different functionality depending on whether you're on the free tier or the paid tier. So different companies will have different ways of giving you access depending on whether you're on the free tier or the paid tier.
And do these certain platforms specialize in certain things, or are they all, pretty much expert in everything? That might seem like a really stupid question, but is Claude better for some particular kind of functions as opposed to ChatGPT?
Absolutely. So in terms of raw intelligence, they all reach the same benchmarks. So there's not that much difference if you're looking across Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, even to some extent Copilot. So in terms of raw intelligence, they're all more or less the same. However, I prefer the writing style of Claude, whereas I prefer the way that ChatGPT gives me instructions to work through problems. So each of the language models has its own, this is going to sound weird, but they have their own psychology and personas. And if you look at the model specifications that the companies give to the AI to describe how they should interact with users, you can start to get a sense of how each of them really does have its own personality. The only way that you can really figure out which one you prefer is to use all of them a lot. And so I really do recommend that you experiment with all the different models. So I will sometimes take a prompt for something that I haven't tried. So in preparing this presentation, I would sometimes take prompts and give them to about 6 language models and then see which one gives me the better response. And then I'll pick 3 that I like, and then I'll take the next prompt, give it to those 3, then I'll see which one I like. And so over the period of maybe 2 or 3 interactions, I'll narrow down to one of the models and then just move forward with that. It really comes down to experimentation and seeing what you like.
Right.
Michael, can you talk a little bit about the privacy aspect of putting some of particularly confidential data
Yeah.
on
Can I
platforms? Yeah.
Can I put that question on hold because I've got a section on privacy later in the presentation, and so I will talk about that in more depth if that's okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So does anyone of this group have experience on using generative AI in this way, in terms of business things?
Yeah.
Kate?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've used it particularly with documentation and policy formations and things like that, particularly just to assist in administrative type functions. It just saves time.
The same goes for me also.
See, Jesper, you got your hand up. Do you say something?
Yes. Yeah. We are using a language model to help us do the journaling of the consultation. So the AI is listening to the entire conversation, and then every physiotherapist make a template what it wants the language model to listen for, and then so if you're interested in red flags or pain signs or pain belief, it listens for that. Or if you want to listen to neurological things, it listens for that. And that is really helpful. It does hallucinate a little bit, but it makes 90% of the work for us and saves us a bunch of time.
And what's the name of the AI model?
It's called Voicare, VOI Care. And it's available, and it is a Danish product, but it is usable in 25 languages. But it's optimized for Scandinavian languages and English.
Okay, thanks.
I assume then, Jesper, that you get a separate consent from your patient to do that.
We do, yes.
Yeah, and Katie put in the chat, I think she's using Clinical Notes. I think that's what that thing's called. She's using that. So there are different AIs on note taking or documentation for clinical practice, and I assume that these are also sort of have certain regulations on privacy and data concerns. Yeah, I always think it very interesting, Michael, that even as a regular user, it's still not in my head for like all the things you can use AI for, like because I wouldn't have thought about using it for this what you just presented. But it's basically my impression is, I recently put it down to generate a campaign for member acquisition for our association, and it was great what came out. A lot of good ideas. So it's still, my thoughts are still all around, providing some texts or writing up some stuff, but it can do like any bits and pieces, and I think it's very interesting to see what you've used it for here.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of general heuristic is it can do everything. I haven't yet come across anything that it can't do. So it can write code, it can build games for you. Anything that a person can do with a computer, we are quickly moving towards a point where AI is able to do that as well. Yeah. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to move on. I think there'll be other opportunities to kind of break and have a bit of a chat. Is that okay? All right. So one of the things that you might want to do is you've got an existing client base and you might want to expand that client base into kind of untapped areas. So you've hired a new member of staff and that staff member's got a skill set and you want to take advantage of that skill set by looking to recruit more clients. So you might want to start by developing a much deeper understanding of your client base, develop targeted marketing strategies for different cohorts within your client base. You might want to establish different communication channels and content types to target different people in your demographic. So you may have some of your patients are elderly, some of your clients are younger athletes, and you can imagine how each one of those groups might want to be targeted in different ways or might want to communicate with you in different ways. So how do you develop a marketing strategy and a communication strategy that makes use of multiple diverse communication channels depending on who the client is? So one of the ways that you might want to do this, the way that they do it in software development, is they build client personas. So a persona is a representation of a group of clients. So you would start by initially gathering data. So you collect client demographics, common conditions that you treat. Maybe you've collected information from your patients about their level of satisfaction around different areas of your practice. You'd have kind of just collect all of the data that you have about how you interact with your clients. You can give that data to AI. You could anonymize it. You should anonymize it. And then ask it to generate a few detailed client personas. So this would include demographic information, pain points of those clients based on their feedback, their expectations around treatment, how they communicate with your practice. And then you can develop marketing messages for that persona. So if I'll give some examples of what those personas might look like. And then you can say, for this persona, give me a template for how I might interact with people who fit into this demographic. And so what I did is I went to Claude. I just pretended I didn't really have a set of client demographics. I just made some stuff up. But you might want to take some of your existing database and you could upload it to a language model. You can say categorize all of these patients into different demographics, and you would base it on your actual practice data. Now, obviously, there are concerns around patient privacy. You should anonymize the data sets. Each of the companies does give you the option to make sure that any of the context that you upload to the language model doesn't get included in future training sets. So there's this misunderstanding that people have where they think that everything that they add to the language model is immediately integrated into its learning, into its understanding of the world. And that isn't true. These models have to be trained, and the training runs can last kind of 12 to 18 months. So it's definitely not taking anything that you're writing and anything that you're uploading and learning from it in the moment. It has to take what you've uploaded, or the company would have to take what you've uploaded and add it to the data set for the next training run. And that's a simple setting that you can turn off in any of the language models. So you can say to ChatGPT or to OpenAI, I don't want you to use any of my context for any of your future training. I think that by default, Anthropic has that turned off. So by default, they don't collect any of your information. And OpenAI, I think, has it turned on by default, but you can turn it off relatively easily just by going into the settings. Now, Whether or not you trust those companies to follow those rules, that's a different story. And every company also is subject to, or not subject to, but is vulnerable to security breaches. So I wouldn't upload any kind of sensitive information to language models. But I think if you anonymized it, then there's probably relatively low risk. But that's something that you would have to, take into account and make a decision based on the regulatory and legal frameworks of wherever you are. I'm not suggesting that you do this, but I do think that it's relatively low risk. So I asked Claude to create 5 client personas to develop a marketing strategy that targets those demographics. So what it did was it split it up into current clients and then 2 growth areas. So I said I wanted to move into home-based care and this Otago program for people who are at risk of falls. You can see on the right, Claude has given me quite a good detailed description of each one of these personas. And you can take that persona and you can now use it to create targeted marketing messages and communication channels for that person. And I went to Gemini, which is the language model from Google, and it's really good at photorealistic images. So I took those client personas and I gave it to Gemini and I said, give me a picture of what these people look like. So this helps me to get a sense of who my marketing messages are aimed at. And so you can generate a few different images that would kind of just give you a sense of who these people are and how you might want to target your messaging and your marketing for them. So again, I'm just going to pause there and maybe just give you an opportunity to reflect on that, how you might use AI to do data analysis for your existing client base and maybe a client base that you want to include in the future, how you could use it to develop a persona. So a persona, again, is just a representation of a group of people. And then you can use those personas to come up with targeted marketing campaigns for specific people who fit into that demographic. So I'll just pause there and then, see if we have any questions or any comments.
So do people want to contribute with regards to if they've been using AI for marketing or been doing any training with their organizations around marketing for through AI?
Maybe while people are thinking, I'll just comment on the image generating capabilities of Imagine, which is Gemini's image generator. 6 months ago, Imagine was still generating people with 6 fingers, and every now and again you'd get a third arm. Those problems have largely disappeared. And so the kinds of images that you can generate now are quite exceptional. And in most cases, you can't tell whether or not it's real or generated by AI. So this technology is just moving so quickly. Just in a few months, you can see massive changes in improvements.
Has anybody used AI for marketing purposes?
So it looks like it's much more popular for client notes, recording patient notes than any other business uses at the moment.
Cool. Well, I'll just move on to the next section. I'm happy to make these slides available. If anybody wants to kind of come back to them afterwards and maybe reflect on some of these points in more detail a little bit later.
Michael, there's a question from Tim in the chat. Well, I think it relates to if everyone is doing that, if everyone is using AI, how can we make a difference?
Well, my response may not make anyone feel especially comfortable. I think that we're going to see massive divide opening up between people who use AI to support their practice and improve performance and people who don't. And so whether you are talking about that at the individual level or the organizational level or regional, national, whatever, I think if you can use AI in a sophisticated way, you're going to move ahead, and people who don't probably will be left behind. So I do think that we're going to see an opening up of a digital divide, even more than currently exists. So, you know, I don't see a way around that. The only way to prevent digital divides from opening up is to prevent people with access to technology from using that technology. Because if they can get a competitive advantage by using the technology, then they will. So, yeah.
I have a question, and let's assume that we use it for whatever we're trying to do. And should we mention that we've used AI, for example, it generating content or improving a service or doing anything, or is it just something we can like not mention? How does it work actually?
So the last slide I have is actually about ethics and creating an AI usage and disclosure policy for your practice.
Yes.
So we can talk about that at the end.
Yeah.
No, I can't get my slides to progress. So let's just see. There we go. So let's move on now. We want to enhance our client experience. So I think this is probably something that people already have some experience with. So this would be more about developing content that addresses client questions. You might want to anticipate what kinds of questions people might have and provide content to address those questions before they ask. This would help improve satisfaction of your clients, but it would also reduce staff time spent on sharing that kind of information with patients. I think you can create really high quality educational resources that showcase your expertise. And you could do things like provide post-treatment follow-up protocols that, again, could be quite evidence-based. And I'll give some examples of what that looks like. Sorry, I know that I'm going through things quite quickly. I just want to make sure we've got time for discussion. So we can use AI for content planning to be more efficient around content creation. We can customize content so that it's specific to individuals within your practice. And you can also use AI to develop a content development framework and calendar so that it can provide content for you to share at certain points in your annual calendar. So you might, coming up to specific points in the year, I don't know, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Possibly in summer, you might be sharing information about hay fever. In winter, you might be sharing information about flu jabs. I'm not quite sure, but a content calendar would give you an opportunity to structure the way that you distribute content to your clients, both your existing clients, but also potentially new clients. What are the kinds of information that people in your community might be interested in receiving that you might want to post in public on your website through your social media channels? So I think the way that you could approach content development can be quite strategic through the use of AI. So in this example, I'm going to talk about a language model used by a company called Perplexity. One of the nice things about Perplexity is that from the start, it was using a technique called retrieval augmented generation. So what it does is instead of just generating a response from scratch, it goes to find content before you even begin. And then it bases its response on that content. So in this particular example, I've asked Perplexity to get evidence-based information about Otago. I've said I want you to use a professional but conversational tone, use peer-reviewed articles from academic journals, make sure you explain the detail using layman terms. So we're starting to see the emergence of reasoning models. This would be R1 from DeepSeek and OpenAI, as well as O1 from OpenAI. And Claude 3.7 is also a reasoning model. What that means is it takes your prompt and it looks at the objective you want to achieve, and it splits that objective up into a series of steps, and then it follows through with those steps without your intervention. So you can see on the left, I've expanded the reasoning that Perplexity was using. So you can see on the left, it's thinking through all the steps in this process. So the prompt that I gave it was relatively simple, and you can see the kinds of resources that it's querying to inform its response. On the right-hand side, you can see a detailed description of those sources. And so this would be a very quick way for you to get a sense of how much trust you would have in the evidence base that Perplexity is using to generate this newsletter that I've asked it to create. So you can see some of the transcripts of the reasoning process on the left. I find it quite charming to read through some of these prompts, or not prompts, responses from the AI. So I quite like that it's saying, first I need to understand David's profile. David is one of the client personas that I gave to Perplexity. I said, I want you to write a newsletter for this person, for this persona. So it goes through the document that I provided about the persona, about this person. And then it says that the newsletter needs to achieve these aims, looking at the search results. And then it goes through the data that it's found in the search results. Then it starts talking about how it's going to structure the newsletter. It's going to first grab attention with a relatable problem. This is going to be near falls for this client persona. Present a target as a solution. So it reasons its way through this problem. And this is the example of the newsletter that it's provided. So this is a really nice evidence-based newsletter that I think is quite compelling for this use case. And then you would just take this and you could, edit it so that it suits your demographic, suits your practice. And this is a really, really simple way for you to generate a newsletter that is evidence-based. So you can go back, you can check the sources, you can make sure that it's based on kind of reasonable evidence that you might consider to be kind of canonical in your area. Obviously, if this is a new area for you, then you might want to spend a little bit more time checking through those sources. But if it's an area that you're comfortable with, I think just a quick reading through of the sources tab will let you know whether or not you can trust the outputs. And you can just go through this newsletter now and edit it so that it suits your demographic. But what's also really, really interesting is that Perplexity allows you to do this thing called Perplexity Pages. So you can, with a very simple prompt, say, build a web page for me on this Otago falls prevention exercises. The prompt that I gave to Perplexity was literally one sentence. If I had given it more context, it would have been far more detailed in its response. And this is a website or a web page that it's created. You can see in the top right, it says publish. If I were to publish this, then it would be an online resource that I could start directing my patients to. This took me about 10 seconds to create because I literally just wrote a short sentence as the prompt, and Perplexity went away and created the web page for me. Now, if you decided that you didn't want this to be kind of Perplexity's information, you could just copy all of this information out of Perplexity and add it to your own website for your practice. You would obviously need to go through the resources or the sources to make sure that this is evidence-based and you're comfortable publishing this information. There are a lot of concerns around things like plagiarism. But remember, right at the very beginning, I said that generative AI is generating content one word at a time. These words don't exist anywhere else on the internet. And so is it plagiarism to take this? That's a kind of a philosophical question that people are still debating at the moment. But these words don't exist. It hasn't gone to any of the sources and taken this information and copied it, and now you're going to go and publish it somewhere. If you had to give the same prompt the next time, it would come up with a different series of words for the same prompt. So I think this is a really interesting way to very quickly generate content that might be useful for your patients in a way that really kind of takes the pressure off of you. So I'm going to pause there and just ask if this is something that you already do, whether or not it's something you might consider doing. Imagine you could do this not only for this persona, but we've got 5 personas. So you could create content for those 5 personas. Now you've got quite a lot of content that you could fit into your content calendar, where you could contact different groups at different times of the year or different times of the month. I'll pause there and see if anyone has any questions or wants to share any experiences.
Yeah, no, Michael, I don't know if you can hear me, sorry, in the NEC.
Yep.
Yes, we use it on a 2 levels. So we use it for membership, for the planning of our social media, for responding to email inquiries. So we would, put in the tone of their email, so replies how they would understand it from a membership basis. And then obviously I use it on a business basis a lot. And it's hugely useful. I think the thing about prompts that we talked about earlier is the important thing is if it's not saying quite what you want it to say, you just keep pushing. And is it right to think that it's always trying to agree or please a little? So actually to question further, and the fact that you can upload the information that you want to be checked is included is hugely beneficial, and they're just improving all the time. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. I sometimes will include in my prompt, I'll say, tell me why I'm wrong. What assumptions have I made? Push back. Don't sugarcoat it. There's all kinds of things that you could say don't hedge, because they always hedge. They try to find the middle ground. So you could say make a commitment. Don't try to satisfy my ego. So there's ways that you can help to steer it away from just agreeing with you. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm wondering if nobody has any urgent questions, if I should just push on.
Yeah, I think it's wise to push on, Michael.
Yeah.
Right. There's just two more sections, and this next one is still pretty mind-blowing for me. So hopefully you haven't experienced this yet. So if we talk about strategic expansion, this is something that you might want to do where you want to build a 3-year plan for how you're going to expand your service. You want to analyze market opportunities. You want to evaluate resource requirements. You want to develop a strategic vision that you can implement over time with deadlines and milestones. You want to map that onto emerging trends in practice in your area. And this is something that would be quite complicated and I think would possibly take weeks, if not months, of your time. And so what I have started doing recently is using the deep research feature that's included in Gemini, Perplexity, and ChatGPT. So it's a feature called deep research, which allows you to do quite complex analysis of documentation. And so I'm just going to give an example of the prompt that I used. Now, this is a multi-stage process where I first went to ChatGPT 01. 01 is the reasoning model from OpenAI. And this was the prompt that I gave to 01. Now, for this kind of exercise, this is actually quite a simple prompt. Sometimes I would write prompts that go on for several pages, and then I would give that prompt to 01, because what I'm asking 01 to do is I want it to build a prompt that I'm going to give to deep research. And so you can come up with your own prompt for deep research, but 01 actually does a really good job of building the prompt for you. What you do is you give it the goals. So you say, I want a final report to provide a framework for goals and milestones over the next 3 years. The report is owned at a business owner who's interested and motivated, but who has limited experience. I want the tone of the final report to be this. Use trustworthy business-related sources. Ask clarifying questions before you begin. So 01 then goes through a series of questions, and you can see it's quite detailed. It wants to know a lot of information about what I actually want to do. Now, remember, this isn't going to actually do the research for me. All of this is just about generating a prompt that I can give to deep research. So the more information that I can give to 01 at this point, the better that final report is going to be. So in this particular example, I just went through these questions very, very quickly. I didn't give it a lot of detail at all. Then it gave me a prompt that took up 5 pages. So I could then take that 5-page prompt and give it to deep research. And this is the transcript of some of the research and reasoning process that deep research was using to try and generate the report that I wanted. So you can look at the sources that it was using. You can see it referred to the CSP and PhysioFirst. You can see that it's looking at the regulatory needs for a private clinic, looking at licensing, insurance, data protection. It's looking at SEO and social media, looking at market trends. And so you can go through this reasoning process and you can decide for yourself whether or not it has paid sufficient attention to some of the areas that you think are important. And then it generated a 35-page report that goes into an enormous amount of depth that you might want to consider if you were wanting to expand your practice in certain areas. So all that I did was I took that report from ChatGPT, I just pasted it into Word, and you can see just looking at the table of contents that this is something that you could definitely use to at least serve as a foundation for private practice development and expansion and growth over a 3-year period. So I'm gonna again just pause there and just ask if anyone has any experience using any of the deep research models, and whether or not this might be something that you think would be useful in your practice and for your members.
Sorry, so Michael, did you developed a prompt and then did you go to another resource, the deep research resource, or did you use the same platform?
It's the same platform. So OpenAI has different models that you can choose, or different features within the same model. So the model refers to the base model. So that would be O1. It's the very intelligent model. And then you turn on the deep research feature in O1. Now, this is not available in the free tier. However, you can go to a company called DeepSeek. DeepSeek is a Chinese company, and they have a very, very capable deep research feature. There is some concern around using the DeepSeek's reasoning model because it is censored. However, they released it as an open source model, so companies in America have already taken that model and built it into their platforms. So you can use DeepSeek as part of Perplexity. So if you go to perplexity.ai, you can choose the DeepSeek reasoning model as part of Perplexity, and then you can just do the same thing with them. Deep Research by OpenAI seems to be the best one at the moment, although Google's Gemini Deep Research feature is, I believe, very good. I haven't experimented with it very much at all.
Thank you.
Has anybody been using this within their organizations? Okay, so I think we should possibly move on, Michael, if you have some more, because we're running out of time.
So just the very last section, we talked about ethics around this. So obviously data privacy regulation is hugely important, and you're going to be governed by all sorts of regulatory and legal frameworks, most notably the GDPR and others that are similar. I think you need to establish very clear boundaries between AI assistance and professional judgment. So what is the AI doing? What are you doing? You need transparent policies that would address client concerns when you are using content generated by AI as part of your practice and as part of your interaction with patients and clients. And there's that last point is you want to innovate, but you also want to be really responsible and accountable. So what I did was I went to Claude and I asked her to draft an AI usage and disclosure policy that I might use for disclosing the way that I use AI with my patients. So this was a very simple prompt that I gave to Claude, create an outline for an AI use and disclosure policy. I said I want to make sure that it adheres to UK regulatory and legal frameworks. So it already knows everything about the GDPR. It knows everything about the Data Protection Act. And so it's able to pull all of that resource into the framework that it would provide for you. And so this just gives me an outline for how I might think about what a usage and disclosure policy should include. Now you can take each one of these sections and you can expand it out as much or as little as you want. And then this is the kind of thing that might serve as a baseline foundation for a policy that you might want to share with your patients. So I'll just kind of wrap up quickly, and then there'll be a little bit of time, maybe 1 or 2 minutes for some last questions. I think using AI enables you to transform your operations across multiple domains, from marketing all the way through to strategic planning over very long periods. It eliminates traditional growth barriers. So, for example, you don't have experience in web development or in marketing or in SEO. These are all things that AI can help support your practice with. And I think if you integrate AI into the business development, you can focus on delivering care that uses using technology to support admin and marketing tasks where you may not have a deep skill set. So there we go. I think that's it. Sorry, I know that I went through it very quickly, but I hope that it was useful.
Thank you, Michael. That was extremely useful. Does anybody have any quick questions? Because we have another couple of minutes before we close off.
Margaret, I think there's a question on the chat.
There's a question from Patrick on the chat. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Patrick was asking Michael if there is a list, or Patrick, would you like to ask?
Yeah, well, basically, I'm a novice user. I haven't really gotten there quite yet.
Yeah.
The impression from your that there are quite different models doing special things. So you would like to use this model for this and this for that. Is there any reference to their unique skills that could be useful in the working on different kind of problems? Thank you.
I'm sure that such lists exist, but I haven't looked for them. I would say, in my opinion, start with Claude, and the free version of Claude is very permissive. It's gives you a lot of tokens. So I know people who use the free version of Claude who don't hit their daily limits, and they use it quite extensively. I prefer the writing of Claude. I like the way it reasons. And so my preference is for Claude over ChatGPT. ChatGPT is far more common. And so more people use ChatGPT. The best advice I can give is to start with one, experiment, trial with all the others. But Claude is a good one to start with.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Michael, sorry, I had a question. Sorry, my screen's off. I was just asked, I've been using Google Notebook LM, yeah, I found that quite useful because you can put in a huge amount of information and it'll help sort of summarize it, but it also will spit out case notes or study notes or podcasts discussing and summarizing. What are your thoughts on that?
Notebook LM is exceptional. It really is very powerful. I use it to upload my lecture slides for students, and then it generates a 30-minute conversation between two people on the content of those slides. It really, really is a fantastic thing that Google is giving away for free, which baffles me. People would pay an enormous amount of money for Notebook LM.
Yeah, and so I guess that there's a risk they might not make it free forever, or they might turn it off, I guess. Is that?
I don't think so, because they're getting an enormous amount of data from users who are using the service.
Okay. But when you when you log into that and you put in information, isn't it secure within your login? At least they can.
Yeah, absolutely. So what they're getting from you is not necessarily the content, but user behavior. So what are people using the service for? And that helps them market that in other areas. They might develop kind of more sophisticated use cases that then you pay a premium for on top of the kind of baseline capabilities that they give you.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you, Michael. I think that was really comprehensive. I think it just hit the right chord. It was exactly what we all needed to go back to both our practices and our organizations and think about how we can use AI more effectively and get on board the wagon. So thank you very, very much. And
that was my pleasure. Thank you.
Good. And thank you everybody for attending from all around the world. We're delighted with the subscription today, and I hope it's been useful for you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Michael.
Thank you very much.
Bye. See
Thanks,
everybody.